Today we're going to get some encouragement from the book of Daniel. Daniel, this great Old Testament book, which tells us about Daniel, who was taken captive to Babylon when Jerusalem was captive by the Babylonians. And we read in Daniel chapter 1, and you see the title there in my Bible, Daniel and his friends obey God. I'm just going to read the first couple of verses, then some verses further on. Daniel chapter 1 verse 1. In the third year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And notice it's small God. Babylonians believed in many gods, not the one true God. And he brought the articles into the treasure house of his God. And then as we go down the passage, we come down to verse 8. We read this, or verse 6. Now from among those of the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And then we notice that the Babylonians and Nebuchadnezzar had trained them. The intention was to train them for 3 years in the language and the literature of the Chaldeans or the Babylonians. And part of this training was the changing of their names. And of course we read in Daniel chapter 1 that their names were changed. This is what we read. Among the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Verse 7. To them the chief of the eunuchs gave names. He gave Daniel the name Belteshazzar, to Hananiah Shadrach, to Mishael Meshach, and to Azariah Abednego. And maybe you know the famous story in chapter 3 of the fiery furnace, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But their original names were Hebrew names, and this is really an encouragement I wanted to sort of bring from this chapter, is that these 4 names right at the start of the book show us something of the grace of God and God's character throughout this book, because Daniel means God is my judge. And of course this means that Daniel recognized, or he was named in recognition that he was accountable to God alone, and his obedience and allegiance and devotion was to be God. Of course this is immediately tested in chapter 1 when the king brings out the best food and the wine. Because Daniel doesn't want to defile himself. Daniel's obedience was to the one true God, and he would have been taught from the Old Testament that he was not to offer food offered to idols, which no doubt the food was. And of course Daniel takes the first step in obeying God, and his 3 friends obey him. And we see actually throughout the book that Daniel recognizes that God is the one to whom he is accountable. Even when he stands before Nebuchadnezzar in chapter 4, he acknowledges and tells Nebuchadnezzar that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men. Then the second name that we have is Hananiah, and Hananiah means God is gracious. And here in this book we see the grace of God, particularly in chapter 4. We see his grace to Nebuchadnezzar, this pagan, ungodly king who would not acknowledge the one true God. And yet God in his grace spoke to Nebuchadnezzar time and time again. Spoke to him in chapter 2 with the dream of the image of different materials. Then in chapter 3 through Daniel's friends who came through the fiery furnace. And then eventually in chapter 4 we see that God spoke to him again in a dream of a tree. And we have the picture of a tree here in front of you. And the tree was cut down, and yet the stump and the roots were left on the ground. Maybe you think of the recent storms, and probably many trees down, and probably trees down with just a stump on the ground. And that's exactly what God showed Nebuchadnezzar in that dream. And that dream, of course, represented Nebuchadnezzar. He had defied and was arrogant in the face of God, and yet God in his grace had to make him live like an ox for 7 years. He had to eat grass. We have grass here in front of us. He had to eat grass for 7 years until he acknowledged that the Most High rules in the kingdom of men. And then, of course, right at the end in chapter 4, we see Nebuchadnezzar became the follower of the true God. We'll call him a Christian today, but he put his faith in the living God. And that's wonderful, and that is the grace of God. Then we have Mishael. Mishael means who is like God. And that's what we see also in this book of Daniel. We see God is the sovereign God in control of history and in control of every event. Chapter 2, we have the dream. Chapter 3 delivers Daniel's friends from the fiery furnace. Chapter 4 reveals himself to Nebuchadnezzar rather, in the dream. Chapter 5, the fingers of a man write on the wall, as Belshazzar praises the gods of gold, silver, and bronze, and wood and stone. And then in chapter 6, of course, he rescues Daniel from the lion's den. And throughout even the prophetical books from chapter 7, from chapter 7 to 12, we see there's no one like God who knows every part of history. And one of the most wonderful assurances we can have in the Bible is that those prophecies in chapter 7 to 12, most of them have been fulfilled, and those that will be fulfilled will be according to God's word. And then the last name in chapter 1 is Azariah. And Azariah means helped of Jehovah. And that's what we see throughout this book, is that Daniel was helped. God brought him into favor with the man in charge of the food in chapter 1. Yes, Daniel requested, but God brought him into favor and enabled him to have that 10-day test. And of course, the 4 young men were found to be 10 times better. Then we see, of course, the grace of God. We see how they were helped of God. Daniel was given courage from God to answer Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Of course, Daniel was given special ability to understand dreams and their interpretation. But he was still helped of God in chapter 2 when Nebuchadnezzar said, if you don't tell me what this dream means, you're dead. And of course, there was the prayer meeting, the overnight prayer meeting with the 3 friends. And of course, God helped them and answered and revealed that in the night vision. And throughout the book, we see how God helped both Daniel and his 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel, to be committed to the true God. And of course, this is the encouragement for us, is that when we honor God and we truly follow God, we're helped of God. And of course, just a reminder that we need help from God each day, and it's one day at a time. We need to ask God for strength and help each day to serve him and can be committed to him. So I hope this has been encouraging for you in the first of our look at the book of Daniel. Thank you for listening.